So the question always emerges when you talk about the rent-to-own arrangement. What's the underlying regulatory and legal framework that guides TPS?
5 years, a number of developers have come on board, and even banks are now realizing that tenant purchase is key towards home ownership. The main fundamental issue is that it gives you time to save, because when we ask you to pay 20% and it is 800,000, you may not have that in your bank account. What we have done in the past is that whenever a project starts, whenever project construction starts, we allow you to pay your deposit during that time of construction. Maybe halfway through, we are able now to allocate houses for those who have met the threshold. So to that extent, that gives Kenyans a time within which they can pay the deposit, because deposit, just like these other expenses which were being discussed earlier in the day, in the morning, are fairly expensive. 200, 400, 300,000 is quite some money. So it gives you time to up the deposit. You pay incremental deposit up to a particular time when when allocation now is done.
Okay, let me come to Peter, and maybe now tweaking the question a bit, and why I was asking that question of the legal and regulatory environment is the consumer protection aspect always comes out when you have this conversation. So maybe I interdeal with a developer X, and they don't meet their end of the bargain when it comes to developing the unit. How does that work?
You actually find that that's one area where we have got a gap. We have got an absence of a legal and regulatory environment governing this area. This area has grown mainly as contract-driven, where people agree based on the tenant purchase agreement. If you look at it, the NHC, if you go through the act itself and the regulation, you find very little in terms of guidelines as to how the tenant purchase process will actually operate. Because at the beginning, it was tailor-made for civil servants. So you find way back in the early years, we had regulations that were guided towards civil servants, because maybe creditworthiness was easier with them. And the reference point you find was a guide only limited to an institution that was going to manage the fund under the Act that will regulate how the ownership will go. But when you come to the actual transaction, it was relying on the actual contract itself. So you find, specifically to that issue of the consumer protection, if you go to UK, you go to USA, you go to South Africa, they have got under the Consumer Act specific legislation that links the tenant purchase ownership with consumer protection. Some of the issues that we just saw here about the quality of so many other things. In Kenya, our Consumer Protection Act actually outs immovable property. It actually does not cover mortgages. It is expressly excluded. So you find that in any such development, you now have to follow through a number of laws to try and align yourself with some of the protection that you are concerned with as a person if you missed it at the contract stage. And that has been one of the key, let's say, areas where, although the private sector has moved and is beginning to embrace it, but the contractual underpinning
regulatory framework. A number of developers have come on board, and these days, everybody is a developer. The lawyer realizes that there is a gap, and he works with the banks, works with a number of institutions, and they call themselves developers. And at the end, some people come from out there. I remember there was a very major case sometime on Mombasa Road, where he takes a lot of deposits from vulnerable Kenyans. And after a few years, there is no development, and this person disappears. How do you get back your money? And Kenyans trusted private developers. That's why perhaps they may need to continue trusting National Housing Corporation. Because when you look at what has gone on as we speak, and I'm happy that the chairman in Parliament of the housing sector is here. One of the issues that we had given in the housing bill, which has not been passed to date, is regulation of housing development. And it basically to ensure that the safety of Kenyans' money is put in law. That once that bill is passed, then we will have a regulatory framework. It is not yet out, but it will show you how we intended to manage the sector with a view to getting away these fraudulent people coming to fleece Kenyans. There is a real need, also working with the private developers. The money is saved with National Housing Corporation. Thank you.
And that's precisely why I asked that question on regulation. And I want to invite the floor. As I continue asking questions, please just shoot up your hand. If you have a question, I'm happy to take it as we continue flowing with this conversation. So, gentlemen, I've been asked this question before on matters regarding the rent to own. When I get into such an arrangement, how should my monthly installment play vis-a-vis the average rent being paid within the specific area for that kind of a unit? Should it be above because I have baked in interest, etc.? Should it be below because this should be a cost-effective means of affording a house in the long haul? Peter.
Yeah, before I do that, in defense of the lawyers in the forum, the example just given about lawyers, I must protest that Housing Finance in 2 occasions have relied on lawyers to try and streamline some of the projects where they have been taken to court and they have been saved by lawyers. But more to the point that you mentioned, that the issue of the payment that you do, the logic of getting into the tenant purchase is that the rent that you subsequently pay should come at a discount because it is you have locked in over a period of time. Remember, it's based on a negotiated purchase price. That purchase price, because it's paid a duration, you'll find that sometimes it's slightly above the market if you have to look at that in theory. And so the discounted price to be the installments are supposed to be marginally lower than what the prevailing rentals are. But because it's of what I mentioned about the unregulated nature of this area, whereas in other jurisdictions you find guidance as to how much the tenant purchase prices should be. In Kenya, we don't have that. So it very much now depends on the developer and what price ranges they're able to agree.
Washington, any input on that?
Normally it is slightly higher, just slightly higher than the market because there is the element of interest rate which is also being payable per month. So if you go to Langata, market rent is about 40, but what they are paying is about 55. So as an owner, you are basically buying your house, then paying slightly more for a period of 10 to 15 years. You consider if you are just paying rent and nobody is appreciating, never, at any one time, the landlord will never tell you that you have paid 40,000 for a very long time. For the next 6 months, now don't pay me anything. Now, if you know that you have to pay that extra 10, 15,000 to own the house, than pay 40,000 and never own a house.
Fair response. Any questions so far as I continue? Yes, let me take from Sita and Nyale, and then we'll continue.
Thank you so much. I feel TPS is really important because of the challenges we've been talking about mortgage registration.